All right, so now that I got the cylinder head on the bench, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and prep this cylinder head, and I'm going to clean up the surface, the gasket surface. I'm going to check the head for warpage. If the warpage checks out good, then I'm going to take out all the valves, check the face of the valve seats, and replace the valve stem seals. This tool here I bought on Amazon years ago, and it actually works really well for these little cylinder heads. It's kind of like a fancy C-clamp, where you line up that end with the bottom of the valve, and then that piece there lines up with the top of that valve spring. And as I turn this, it compresses the spring so that I can take the valve keepers out. Oh Lord, that dropped in the bucket. I'm gonna have to find that. So it makes it easy to take those out. And once those are out, try not to lose them like I did. Oh, hey, thankfully it was just the handle. Okay, so once those valve keepers are out, there's the other one. Don't want to lose those. I'll probably even just take them and throw them right in that little container there. Once those are out, you can loosen up the tension on that spring, and that will allow the valve spring to come out. Okay, so there's my spring. There's that little plate that goes on the top for the valve keepers. There's that piece. Oh, so that's not part of it. Okay. This goes on the top of the valve, so don't want to lose that little cap. So I'm gonna set that right there. Oh, there's my valve. And really what you want to look for is any like pitting or cracks or scuff marks on that valve. This one looks pretty good. Same way with the valve seat. You want to just do a visual on that valve seat. You know, make sure that there's no issues with that seat. I definitely do see, you know, quite a bit of oil inside of there, so it's possible that the valve stem seal has gone bad, which is right in here. And my head gasket kit does come with new valve stem seals, so I'll just take a pair of pliers and twist those off if I need to. Get that valve seal off of there, put the new one on. And you're gonna wanna do this to all the valves, okay? You're gonna wanna change out all the valve seals on those valves, check the valves, check the seats. You know, if there's a valve that looks pretty bad, I might end up just replacing it and lapping in a new one. But before I go any further, I did want to take some time to show you guys how to use that valve spring tool. Before I go any further though, I am gonna clean up this surface here. You could use like a razor blade. You could use your angle grinder with a cookie pad if you use a low grit pad, and just, you know, go slow with it and don't dig into one spot, because we want to make sure that this surface doesn't get warped or distorted. Otherwise we'll have another head gasket failure. So the next thing I'm going to check, now that I've got the surface nice and clean and smooth, is I'm going to check for warpage. So I've got my straight edge here. I got this one, I believe on Amazon actually. It's an OEM Tools brand, made in the USA. Don't cheap out too much on these straight edges, guys, because ultimately this is what determines whether or not the gasket surface on the cylinder head and the block is warped. You want to make sure that this cover goes on it, and make sure you lay it down in a flat spot on a bench or in flat spot in the bottom of your toolbox, so that way the bar itself doesn't ever get distorted. But it has a laser cut edge right there. The maximum warpage or allowable warpage on this head is 4 thousandths. So I've got my feeler gauge here. The one on the right is 4 thousandths. The one in the middle is 3 thousandths. The one on the left is 2 thousandths. So I'm hoping there's no warpage. The way that you do it is you set this up against the cylinder head like this. Push it up against there. Just make sure it's straight on there. Got to kind of hold it in place just right. And then you try and dip your feeler gauge in between that straight edge. If it goes in between that straight edge, then that tells you that you have warpage. So I checked it that way. It didn't slip through, so we're good. I'm going to check it this way. That side's good. I'm going to check it that way. You want to check it in a bunch of different directions just to make sure that there's no warpage anywhere on the head. I'll check it across here. Nothing there. And I'll check it down here as well. All right. So my feeler gauge didn't go between that straight edge anywhere on that cylinder head, so that tells me that the gasket surface on this head is not warped. So I'm good to go ahead and pop all those valves out, replace the valve seals, and put it all back together. If the head was warped, I would have to take this to a machine shop and have them resurface it. So that way I would get a good seal on my new head gasket. But since I don't have that issue, I don't have to take this to a machine shop. So it does help to keep things organized. Take a small magnet from the end of a little free screwdriver and just use that to get those valve keepers out of there, so that way they don't get lost while you're doing this process. So there's my valve seal. It's a little bit difficult to do it with one hand and a pair of pliers, but it can be done. So I'm just going to pop out all those valve seals and then put in some new ones. All right, so I got the whole head gasket set here. This one's a Fel-Pro. Fel-Pro is my go-to for gaskets. There's the part number there. This kit comes with, of course, valve seals, fill the cylinder head. Right now I'm working on the exhaust valves. These are the exhaust valves here, and these are the intake valves. The intake valves are typically larger than the exhaust valves. Anyways, the reason why I'm filming now is because I want to show you guys these exhaust valves as they're coming out. The face of the intake valves, they all looked really good. The valve seat on the inside of there looked really good on those intake valves. What I'm noticing now on these exhaust valves is, this is the one that I haven't ground down yet. The face of that valve is pretty gummed up. Try and get it to where you guys can see it. Oh yeah. So you can see all those pits on the face of the valve right there. All those burr marks and stuff. That's just from normal wear and tear. It happens over time. Sometimes you can grind them and clean them up. I was able to do that with the first valve here. So I was able to grind it down, clean it up with some valve grinding compound, and the face of that valve looks much better. It's much cleaner. There's no pits. There's no gouges in it. Really, what you want is a good seal from this valve. And newer engines, newer valves, valve seats, they're hardened, they're stronger materials than they used to be. So sometimes you can get away with just grinding the old valves and then you get a good seal. Sometimes you don't get away with it and you still had those pits, you know, and scuff marks and stuff in the face of that valve that you can't get out, and then you got to replace the valves, which, you know, it happens. It is what it is. I think I'm lucky enough on this engine to where I can just grind down these old valves and they'll be just fine. So the way that I do that, some people call it lapping valves as well, is you get a little bit of valve grinding compound, put it on a piece of cardboard here, and just take and get a coating of that valve grinding compound on the face of the valve. Get a fair amount on there. Sometimes it takes a couple of hands to do this, so I had to stop filming. But anyways, you want to make sure you get that valve grinding compound all around that face of the valve, and then I'm going to take and put it back in the head, slip it back into place. And then what you want to do is you want to turn that valve around. So you could technically do it by hand if you had to, like this. To make it go quicker, I like to use a drill with an old piece of vacuum hose. I got a zip tie on there to help put a little bit more tension on the hose. And so I got my drill hooked up. You just turn the drill, you work it back and forth. I'll show you guys this end. And you want to do this about 20 to 30 times, enough to where that valve grinding compound starts to change color. It should start to turn like a light gray color when it really starts to do what it needs to do. It changes a little bit because as you grind that valve down, that valve grinding compound will wear down as well. It's pretty abrasive. It's good stuff. So I'm just going to do this about 20, 30 times. I already lost count, but that's about how many times you want to do it. All right, so I'm gonna clean that up. So I did end up doing it one more time just to clean it up a little bit better, but the face of that valve looks way better now than it did before. No burrs, no scuffs, no gouges or nothing. And the valve seat looks much cleaner as well. I know it's kind of hard to see it in the camera, but it definitely looks much smoother. No, you know, burrs or gouges or burn marks or anything. So I'd say I'm going to be good to go to do the rest of the valves and clean up all those valves and be able to reuse them. All right, for the valve stem seals, I like to use a 12-point socket. That way it kind of fits around the seal better. And I use a hammer and I tap it in place. You want to make sure that they're installed just flush with like the top of this little seat right here where it sits on top of, excuse me, valve guide. That's the valve guide. And I don't know if you guys can see it in there or not. Probably not. But the inside of this seal right here is lined up with the top of that valve guide. So, all right, so when you go to put the valve back in, you want to make sure that those keepers are in place. Absolutely had to. You could use a dabble of wheel bearing grease on those valve keepers to hold them in place as you're putting tension back on that spring. So as I turn this piece here, of course, the spring comes up and those keepers catch on the valve and no longer allow the valve to pop out, or the spring, mainly the spring, is take a little screwdriver and just kind of push on them a little bit, just to make sure they're not going to pop out and make sure they're installed properly. These little pieces right here for the camshaft, rocker arm assembly, they like to fall off after you've taken them off, so it wouldn't hurt to put a dabble of wheel bearing grease on the inside of that and stick it on the end of the valve, just to make sure that it's not coming off. I'll probably leave them in that case for now because I don't want them to fall off as I'm moving everything around. Probably ought to start taking these ones off as well, so I don't lose those. But yeah, that's how you reinstall the valve. And I'm gonna go ahead and do it to the rest of them. I'll clean up the intake valves as well, and put in those new valve seals. And I've just been using compressed air to clean them up. You could use brake cleaner, you could use parts cleaner. This cylinder head's actually pretty clean, not a whole lot of carbon buildup or anything. All right, guys, so I got all the valves back in, and what I'm doing right now is I'm doing the water check on the valves. So I poured some water on top of those valves. I've got it laying flat on the bench. What this does is it tests the seal around the valve and the valve seat to make sure those valves are going to seal properly. And if they don't seal properly, then that water is going to leak past the valve, and we'll start to see it underneath the valve through there, through these ports, whether it's for the exhaust valve or the intake valve. It doesn't really matter too much, which valve it is. What that does is it tests for a leak between the valve and the valve seat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and leave this for about 15 minutes at the least. Go work on some other stuff, start cleaning up some of the other parts, and then come back to it. I do also have the spark plugs in right now, so that way the water doesn't, of course, just go down the spark plug tube. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and take my angle grinder and lightly sand down the block with that red cookie pad. It's a finer grit cookie pad. I'm going to be real gentle with it, clean it up, scuff it up, and then go ahead and check for warpage, just like I did on the cylinder head. All right, so now it's time to go ahead and check for warpage across the block. I've got it all cleaned up, at least enough to check warpage. So I'm going to take my straight edge, get that ready to go. Make sure it's nice and clean. And I'm just going to take that straight edge, put it across the block like this, and then take my feeler gauge and try and run it up underneath that straight edge. We shouldn't see anything more than 0.003 of warpage across the block. So I'm going to go ahead and check that. So the feeler gauge does stick in a little bit. I just got to make sure I'm holding it right. So we do have 0.002 of warpage across that spot right there. We do not have 0.004. So that's good enough, at least in that spot. So We do have a little bit of warpage across this block, but it's not bad enough to where it needs to be resurfaced. You can check it in a few different patterns. All right, I'm back at my cylinder head, and luckily all of the water is still within the valves. But what you really want to check for is to see if there's any leaks up in here, to see if it's leaking past the seat. So I'm just going to shine my light in there, take a look, and see if there's any droplets. This cylinder looks good, at least for the intake valve. So I'm gonna go around and just double check all those, make sure there's no drips, no leaks. I've been letting this sit for about half an hour now, so if there's anything leaking, I'll be able to find it. And if there's no leaks, then I'll clean this all up, get it all dried off with my compressed air, and then be able to put it back on the block.